This video was brought to you by Brilliant. Keir Starmer's first few weeks in office were never going to be easy. He'd inherited a mess, and even though he'd won an enormous majority, his actual vote share at the election was remarkably low. This incongruity suggested that even if the public really wanted the Tories gone, they weren't wholly enthused by Labour, and their patience would be limited. Nonetheless, his promise of a more stable politics and a flurry of impressive policy announcements earned him a remarkable amount of goodwill in the days after taking office, and there was a widespread optimism that Labour's return might mark the beginning of a period of better relations between Britain's politicians and the public. Unfortunately for Starmer, in the past few weeks, that goodwill has apparently evaporated, and polling done in the last few days suggests that a poll slump that began earlier this month has since accelerated. So in this video, we're going to take a look at how Starmer's polling has deteriorated recently, what might be driving this decline, and what he might do to stop it. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So, let's start by taking a look at the polls. Before Starmer came to office, his poll numbers were actually pretty bad, and most pollsters gave him a net approval rating, defined as the percentage of people who approve of his performance minus the percentage who disapprove, below 0. Opinion, for instance, gave him a -10 in the weeks going into the election, while YouGov had him hovering between -15 and -20. However, in the days after the election, Starmer's approval rating spiked. YouGov had him at about 0, while Opinion temporarily gave him a net approval rating of about +20. Now, this poll jump is often dismissed as just a classic honeymoon period that new leaders often enjoy after taking office. But it's worth saying that while leaders did indeed used to enjoy a spike to their approval ratings in their first few days, this so-called honeymoon effect has waned over time as politics has become more polarized. Boris Johnson, for instance, only saw a slight improvement in his approval ratings after he took office in 2019, going from about -20 to nearer -10. And Theresa May's approval rating actually fell after the 2017 election. And it's worth comparing this to 1997, when the newly elected Prime Minister Tony Blair's approval ratings stayed above their pre-election levels for nearly 2 years, which is certainly a long honeymoon period. The point we're making is that Starmer's honeymoon was genuinely impressive, not least because he didn't actually win many votes in the election, and because there is a sense, at least temporarily, that Starmer might end up being far more popular in office than he was in opposition. Unfortunately for Starmer, though, that's not how things panned out, and in the past few months or so, his approval ratings have reliably declined, plummeting to new lows in recent weeks. More in Common polling from the last couple of days found that Starmer's approval rating had fallen to -16, a drop of 27 points from his post-election high of +11. Similarly, while YouGov haven't done a new poll on Starmer personally, polling on the Labour government done over the last week found that their net approval rating has fallen from about 0 when it first came into office to an astonishing -28, with 51% of Brits saying that they disapproved and just 23% saying they approved. For comparison, this is lower than any other new government in recent history, apart from Theresa May in 2017, and way lower than the last Labour government to win an election, 2 months after the 1997 election, when Tony Blair's government had an approval rating of +46. This disappointment has also been relatively widespread across policy areas, with an increasing number of voters expressing dissatisfaction over the government's handling of crime, the economy, health, housing, welfare, and immigration. So, what's wrong with the UK's new government? Well, the TLDR is basically everything. Public services are crumbling. Starmer has had to release certain prisoners in order to free up space for rioters arrested during the first couple of weeks. There are signs that Thames Water could be about to collapse, and a shortfall in NHS funding has recently been identified. The media has clearly picked up on this too, and are basically constantly speculating about which taxes Reeves is going to increase in the October budget in order to pay for these public services. And this does make sense. Labour have already tried to rein in public spending through means testing for winter fuel allowance and through committing to the previous 2-child benefit cap. To add to this, Labour has also been hit by something of a cronyism scandal. This started when questions were raised about a Downing Street pass being handed to a Labour peer, and this specific peer is also one of Starmer's largest personal donors. Swiftly following this, it was also revealed that other Labour allies, such as Ian Cornfield, who had donated around £20,000 to prominent Labour figures in the lead up to the general election, had been appointed to civil service roles. The issue for Labour here is that they've spent a good deal of the time in the lead up to the election trying to claim that there'll be a clean break from the Tories, and that they'll restore trust in politicians. This scandal, though, obviously undermines that argument. It's also worth mentioning here that Starmer has created more negative headlines for himself this week after the plans for a potential new outdoor smoking ban was revealed. Now, there will obviously be people that agree with the government that this is necessary, but for those who remain unconvinced, the government really didn't put any work in prior to the announcement to convince them this was necessary. And this is sort of the whole problem with the Labour government at the moment. It's entirely plausible that many of the actions they're taking are necessary. After all, they've been dealt a difficult hand as the incoming government, and balancing the books and getting the finances under control will require difficult political decisions. But to expect the public to embrace them without the legwork being put in first to explain why they are necessary is just wishful thinking. This is likely a big reason behind Starmer's worsening polling right now, but it's also worth asking whether this actually matters. Does the fact that the Labour government are struggling to win over the public actually materially change anything? That's because Labour was only elected a few weeks ago in a landslide victory, and the UK's political system is often described as an elective dictatorship. In that, once elected, there's very little anyone can do to stop the government. This only becomes more true if the government in question has a large majority, like Starmer does. So the only real time that bad polling numbers matter is in the run-up to an election, which isn't set to happen for another 5 years. However, this bad polling could certainly suggest that Starmer just isn't all that great at politics, and that he could struggle to win the political argument over the next 5 years. Alternatively, it could simply be that Starmer is making the difficult decisions early, so that in 5 years' time, he can make easier ones that win voters back. But ultimately, only time will tell. Understanding these sorts of issues is really important, but also difficult, and that's why TLDR is here to help you. Unfortunately though, the world's only getting more complex, especially when it comes to things like tech and AI, and I'm not qualified to teach you about that. But luckily, Brilliant are. Brilliant is where you learn by doing, with thousands of interactive lessons in maths, data analysis, programming, and AI. In fact, Brilliant is a learning platform designed to be uniquely effective. Their first principles approach helps you to build understanding from the ground up. Each lesson is filled with hands-on problem solving that lets you play with concepts, a method proven to be 6 times more effective than watching lecture videos. For instance, if you did want to learn more about the increasingly important world of tech, then you might want to check out their How Technology Works courses. They run you through everything from how computer memory works to how exactly a GPS can pinpoint your location, or why some online videos buffer, and how compression enables modern streaming. And although I did throw myself under the bus earlier, and I'm not qualified to teach you about that, I do have a computer science degree, and I can tell you that these courses aren't just high quality, they're also far more interesting than the lectures I sat through. To try everything Brilliant has to offer for free for a full 30 days, visit brilliant.org/TLDR, or click the link in the description. That way you'll get 20% off an annual premium subscription, and they'll know you came from us.